me welcome everybody to our informal brown bag lunch. You don't have to sit all the way at the end. You can come down a little more. This is part of an informal series of brown bag lunches that are sponsored by the Doctoral Program in Educational Leadership. Today you're going to hear a description of a very interesting project that's been developed primarily as an online resource. We were talking about whether to call it a book or not, but it doesn't look like a book, so we're calling it an online resource. And the coordinator, the core presenter, is going to be Dr. Rose Barunda from the faculty, who will describe in more detail the origins of the project and how it's expanded and turned into this project. And she's got two folks who are going to help her with the presentation. I'll let her do the introductions. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you for coming, everybody. This manuscript, in essence, it's a free publication. We got flyers out to everybody. And it came about from the work of one of my doctoral students, Fedibin Edegoyen, now Dr. Edegoyen, chaired his doctoral dissertation. And essentially, Fedibin was looking at students at the community college in which he works, Latino students, not being able to complete their education. And he wanted to understand why. And that's a big part of what we do in doctoral programs, is understanding why. And then addressing the issues pertaining to the why and hopefully coming up with solutions. Well, in this case, when Dr. Edegoyen did his doctoral defense, and he was very passionate. Not only was he very passionate about what he uncovered, but the data was so rich and the voices of the participants in the study. I thought to myself, this is material that needs to be shared. Because essentially what the gentlemen who he interviewed, they were all primarily graduates of Sac State, some of them in master's programs, doctoral programs, and though they were successful in the eyes of many of us here today, it was not without overcoming challenges. And those challenges were made very clear, and the way in which the families navigated through those challenges was something that I felt that the story needed to be told. Coming from the cultural tradition in which storytelling is very big, I thought maybe we could put this in some sort of storyline, and it could be utilized by people working in the Latino community to share with others. So I was able to recruit a couple of my colleagues, Dr. Gonzalez, who you're going to see in a little bit, Dr. Romero, who is also one of the professors in the doctoral program, and we started drafting out the pieces, and in realizing that we needed to have women's voices as well. So from there, drew from Viriana Diaz, Dr. Diaz's doctoral dissertation, and she had incredible data from young women and their struggles as well. So now we look at the gender-related issues within the community. So we basically interwove, we took some creative licenses with the storyline to hook it together, and then realizing that our Spanish was not at the level that we wanted it to be able to do the translation. We recruited Veronica Ocampo, who will also be co-presenting with us today, and actually vetted the material through the program that she oversees. So we did sort of a field testing to make sure, is this something that's relevant? Are we keeping it realistic? Does it speak to the issues of the communities that you're serving out there with many of our students? So without further ado, what I'd like to do is I'd like to pass it over to my two colleagues here, and they're going to go through the storyline. For those of you here in attendance, you'll see that we have a flyer. It's a free download. What we're hoping is that, particularly with the concerns with people who are here, whether they're first generation, second generation immigrants, that I would say that the heightened sense of fear right now, the heightened sense of alienation, the heightened sense of the feeling that you don't belong here because you don't look like what some people perceive to be what is American. And we have all heard of what just happened last Thursday in Kansas in terms of, we talk about hate crimes and things of that nature going on, that this is a time for us to talk about reality of what's happening and how do we use documents like this to talk real openly about discrimination, to talk about bias, which are several of the topics that are touched upon very strongly within the manuscript. So what you'll see are topics that if you're working with families out in the community, that you can use this as a resource and as a tool to talk through those issues, but also to see how others have navigated that road as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Gonzalez and Ms. Ocampo as well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amber Gonzalez, and I guess we'll just sort of begin. I am in the Child Development Program, and I look at how students are really developing as they navigate the pathway through the P20 pipeline. So not only through kind of grade school, but also as they're selecting, choosing, entering into college, and then as they're pursuing graduate and master's degrees. And so we'll have a lot of those stories as we sort of go through the program. Yeah. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one.
Yeah. My name is Veronica Ocampo, and I coordinate the ME program here at Sac State, Migrant Education Advisor Program. And the ME program is part of a result of collaboration between Butte County and the Counseling Department here at Sac State. And basically our mission is to produce bilingual multicultural counselors. And Cuentos de Exito, Stories of Success, basically speaks to a lot of the stories that our students are leading on a day-to-day basis. And our students, grad students, they are working with migrant students, are out in 6 counties, and the story of Alonso speaks a lot to what our students are experiencing on a daily basis.
See you later.
Oh, start? You can start.
Okay, so our story sort of starts out with a principal who we refer to as Lisa. And the mom here, they have just arrived in the U.S. And so mom has put her children in school, and midterms are coming, and so her son Alonso brings home the report card. And the mom's like, Alonso, what does this F stand for? And very proudly he says, Mom, it stands for fantástico. I did fantastic in class. And so his mom sort of starting to feel like, is that really what the F stands for? I don't know. Goes and asks the principal. So she walks into the school very courageously, because she hasn't been in the school system in the United States, goes to the principal's office and says she'd like to speak to the principal. And the principal, with wide open arms, welcomes her into her office, and they sit together at a table with, as you can see, there was really no blockage between her and the mom. They were both at a table, equal distance apart from one another. And mom asked, what is this about? And the principal sort of laughed and said, well, that's not exactly what it stands for. This is the grading system in the United States. And so explained the grading system, and she said, but would you like to bring in Alonso, and we can talk about some of the resources that are here on campus, on the school side, that can help him to get better grades. And so she said, absolutely. Mom was like, that would be great. And son comes in, and once he walks in, he sort of is like, Mom's sitting there with my report card. I kind of know what this is about. And there's 2 paths that the principal could have taken. So one of those paths would be to really sort of scold Alonso and tell him how naughty he was, that he lied, and really do this sort of, I don't know how to describe it, aggressive way. And then there's the other path that can sort of say, okay, what's done is done, but mom now knows what it is, but hey, we have some resources here on campus that can help you. And so I'm not going to scold you, I'm not going to punish you. Instead, we're going to work together to help mom not only better understand how the grading system works, but also help you bring up your grades. And so that's sort of what our educational system is faced with, is always these sort of 2 paths. How do we help these individuals, or do we sort of brush them aside and say, you have not acclimated to our system?
And just going along with the emphasis on communication, making sure that we're communicating and collaborating with our parents, and that's basically what we see going on here, the collaboration, the communication, open and honest between parent and administrator.
And so here we sort of rewound now to before Alonso has arrived in the United States. And so many times parents have to have this discussion in Mexico about coming to El Norte, traveling to El Norte, and what that looks like. And so Alonso's actually listening in on sort of this conversation that's happening between mom and dad about we need to go. We need to travel, we need to provide better for our children, I need to get better pay, and so we need to make this travel. And Alonso here is listening to this and sort of having to contemplate, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my family? What does this mean for me as sort of one of the young children in this family?
Mm-hmm. And our kids basically go through the phase where they really don't have any choice. They know that they have to follow along with their parents, and so therefore we want to make sure that when they get here, pretty much they were taken away from an area of comfort where they have their friends, their community, everything they knew. And so they're coming to a new culture, a new life. And like I said, basically with no choice. So once they get here, then as educators, we want to make sure that we always don't forget that, take that into consideration, that they're here because they had no choice. They were taken by their parents. Remember, they were under 18, a lot of them. And so they transitioned to a new culture, and we a lot of times have them listen to a lot of conversations, and they pretty much become more adult-like. And so when you see students here, don't be surprised that they're coming to your class late because they already done dishes, they already help mom with bills, and a lot of these things that they take along when they move to a country where they pretty much have to become the helpers along, basically also doing what's expected of them academically.
And so Veronica kind of talked about this, but they're making this sort of travel, if you will, across the border in very sort of challenging conditions, if you will. So they're oftentimes doing this at night. Sometimes they'll even be separated. So my family lived right off the border in Mexico. In Texas. They lived off the border right there where we sort of were one of those families that the border crossed us. We didn't cross the border. And so my family had a little farmhouse, and oftentimes that was the first place that they came after crossing the border, was to my grandmother and my grandfather's house to get tacos with frijoles and rice and a place to sleep, and oftentimes some clothing. My mom distinctly remembers some of her clothing being taken or not gifted, I guess, to these people that would come to the home looking for safety because they just crossed the border, oftentimes very scared, and sometimes these were just children because somehow they would get sort of, mom would have to go with another group for safety reasons, dad maybe traveled before, and so sometimes these are just little kids coming to this home looking for water, food, some sort of shelter, and so that oftentimes does happen. And so you also have to realize that these children have also gone through a very challenging time that many of us will never have to face, right? Of fear, of being captured, of being killed, of being victimized, physically, emotionally assaulted. And so all of these things are kind of going on with them, and it does impact their development over the years. Okay. So here you can also see, this is Alonso. Then once they do get to the U.S., then the parents have this sort of aspiration for their children. They came to the U.S. oftentimes to provide better for their children. And so these children enter our school systems, and many times there's no creation of a sense of belonging for them within the school system structure. They don't necessarily mesh with the Mexican students who've been there for quite some time. I think, fourth generation, and so I really don't even speak a lick of Spanish. because I know. I know. But neither do your children. Right. But it's true. As we have generations, we will see that the language starts to deteriorate. And here Alonso speaks primarily Spanish, and he's going into the school system, and he doesn't mesh well with the people that look like him because he doesn't have that language, or he has a different language. And so that's challenging. And so here Alonso is saying, look, Dad, I know you came here because you want me to go to school, you want me to have a better education, but I don't want to go to school. I want to be like you. You're working hard, you're working in the farm, you're putting food on the table, and I see how much you're working, and I want to give like you're giving. I want to be able to help provide for the family like you are. I'm a man too. So there's also these gender dynamics that go into play here. There's this parent-father role model dynamics that go into play here. And then there's this sense of, I don't belong in school. I don't look like the other people. Nobody's welcoming me. And so there's also that's going on here.
So the conversation that takes on is basically the father explaining, we came here because I want you to work and have a better life, not work with your hands, work with your brain, go get an education, get educated. And so he explains the fact that although he had an education back in Mexico where they lived, he came here, but because of the language, he was forced then to work with his hands. And so Alonso pretty much understands that, but like it was shared before, he also wants to contribute. So one of the things, the message that we want to send our parents is basically that they have a choice. They can either tell their kids, people tell them that for them to have high expectations. So when we work with our migrant parents, I always tell them that yes, it will be great if they get a job and they have a bachelor's degree and if they have benefits, but always go and tell them that they can get a master's, that they can get a doctorate, that sky is the limit. So we always tell them that basically having high expectations will make a difference with working with Latinos. And that's basically what Alonso's dad was doing here.
But Alonso, like many of our children, don't listen to parents. I remember I didn't. My parents always had the best interest, and I think if I would have listened, I'd be definitely somewhere else, or I would have gotten here quicker. But so children tend not to listen. So Alonso actually dropped out of high school, and he started working in the field, and he was not telling his parents. He thought, I'm going to leave in the morning, go to school, and I'm going to go work, and I'm going to make some money, and then I'm going to come home after school, and I'm going to help my family around the house. That is a better use of my time. And so that is oftentimes what our children do. They actually drop out, especially our men, because they feel a pressure to contribute to the home. So we see a lot of high school dropouts, and those are oftentimes, in terms of numbers, those are oftentimes our boys. And oftentimes it's because of this. And so Alonso's dad finds out, like any parent would, right? Parents are definitely smarter than, I think, any other being. They just have they have an an inside thing that just tells them everything. Even my colleagues and my friends that are parents, I'm always like, how do you know that about me? And they're like, because I'm a parent. I need to get some more single, non-children friends. But so Alonso's dad takes time off of work to go to the school system. And so there's oftentimes, in terms of deficit thinking, there's this thinking that Latino parents, immigrant parents, do not care about their children's education because they can't go to the school system during those hours. And oftentimes that's because the only time to farm is during daylight hours. And so when I do have to take time off to go to my child's school, that is a lot of money that I'm taking off. That's money that I could be putting in my family, in my house. And so he took time off to make it a point to go to his child's school and to find out, okay, so my kid hasn't been at school for a couple of weeks, but I definitely want to get him reinstated. What can I do? Principal asks the child, well, why haven't you been here? Alonso says, because I want to make money. I want to contribute to my family. I get that my dad wanted me to get an education, but that's just, it's not what I really want to do. And so the principal has an aha moment. Now this is a different principal from the first part of the story. But this principal has an aha moment and says, well, you know what? I can put you in a track. It's called a vocational track, track B. And we can have you going to school Tuesday and Thursday, and then Monday, Wednesday, Friday, plus you can go to the local resorts, and you can be anything. You can be a carpenter, you can be their electrician, you can train to be a waiter, you can train to be a cook, you can do all of those things, and we'll just have you come to school Tuesday and Thursday. Alonso's like, that's what I want to do. Dad feels a little uneasy with it, but is like, that's going to get my kid back in school. Okay. A couple of things this principal forgot to tell Alonso and Alonso's parents. One of these is that being on that track, you are not going to complete the A through G requirements required to get to get entrance into college. And many times that is what happens to our parents. We know that we want our kids to go to college, but we don't necessarily know how to get them there. We just know, and we trust. We put a lot of trust in the teachers and the school principals to provide our students, our children, with that information to get our children to school, to college. And so not knowing, Alonso's dad was like, where do I sign? And Alonso, super excited, is like, awesome.
Yeah, and then this is basically, we see the lack of information that gets out there to our students. And so our migrant advisors, our MIPA advisors, this is one of the work that they do, making sure that they inform both parents and students of the choices that they have. A through G, graduation requirements, so they get training on that, and they also share that with students, making sure that not only you have 2 options, which is either work or high school, you have 7 options, so exploring all the options that students have. And by the work that we do as school counselors, we want to make sure that students like Alonso get the correct information, and not only information that's limited, but information that is out there that explains all the choices that they have.
And so this was sort of the choice that Alonso's kind of between. Another thing that oftentimes students, and this goes kind of across areas, is gangs, the gang life. So you have to remember kind of what Veronica had mentioned. A child is taken from their sort of community, their friends. They don't really oftentimes have that choice. And so they're looking for something to belong to. And if they can't find that in the school system, then they're going to find that on the streets. And oftentimes that's when they end up in the gangs, is because they're looking for someplace to belong. And so if we start to rethink about how we can create those spaces of belonging within our schools, then we will actually probably see a decrease in street life.
And again, connecting it to the foundation of communication, collaboration, and consistency, right, with our parents, making sure that our parents have the skills, so if we can advocate for parenting classes at schools, where they know that if your student is showing these behaviors, it is because he might be involved in a gang. And so once again, making sure that we do that communication with our parents and making sure that they understand the reasons why they do it, but also if the student is involved in gangs, what will be the behaviors that they will be having.
And then also providing resources on how to get your child out of the gang, because that also is something that parents struggle with, is knowing, okay, now I recognize my child is in a gang, now what do I do to get him out? Again, having the school system understand how to do that in that process.
And this was basically, again, the options, right? Reality. It is reality, and if you do get into the gangs, this is where you're going to be headed. And so we have, like I shared with you, that communication. A lot of the times it's really simple for us to say, we should be communicating with our students, basically with our students and with our kids, our own kids. And so we have Alonso's dad here taking that time, and you can only imagine how tired he gets home from work after these long hours, but he is taking the time to speak to Alonso and say, like, listen, what you've seen out there, it's real and it's happening, but you have an option, and if you do follow that path, this is where you're going to be headed. And so he basically is contemplating the fact that he doesn't want to go that path.
And so he chooses to come to Sac State, right? So he actually, what happens is a lot of our programs, such as MEEP, brings students from the high schools, and they not only bring the students, but they bring their parents too, because going to college for a lot of these individuals is a family affair. It's a family journey. You don't do it alone. And many of us are nodding our head because we've been there, right? I know, like, I did not go to college by myself. My parents went with me, right? And they did that by staying up really late when I was writing a paper and making sure I had warm coffee and something to eat at 4 o'clock in the morning when I'm trying to finish the paper, or yelling at me as to, why are you still writing the paper? Like, it's due tomorrow, you should know. So they also are going along this journey with you. So MEEP actually brings parents and families, siblings, to campus, not just the students.
Mm-hmm. And also in the story, one of the reasons why Alonso made it also to college, what was helpful is that he had an older brother that basically was already in college. So that made a huge difference for him, because that brother was able to come back and say, this is what you should be doing. If you continue with this path, you're gonna end up only graduating from high school, but you're not gonna have A through G classes. So making sure that we encourage that with our students, that you would say, like, yeah, you can go to community college, you can go to a CSU, UC, private community college, and it really, what your option is, we want to just make sure that you have an open door. So as long as you meet the A through G requirements, and you have open door to CSU or UC, then if you choose to take another path, then that's going to be your choice. But we also want to make sure that our students have at least that option and have an open door to be able to make a choice on making it to the CSU system or the UC system. And if they do community college or they do technical schools, within our migrant students, as long as they have a post-secondary education, but like I said, one of the things that really helps is that he already had a role model that was there for him.
Another thing that happens quite a bit with our students is that although they're receiving support from mom and dad, they may not be receiving support from our extended family. So, for example, I can speak of myself as a woman. When I decided to go on to pursue education beyond my bachelor's degree, many of my tios would tell me, I can't believe you're such, they would call me a little dumb, because they're like, you're going to be too educated to get a good man. And I still have my tios that say that. Some of my uncles still say, well, the reason Amber's not married is because she's too educated. And I'm like, okay. But it is challenging to have to hear that from your own family. And we laugh about it, but it does happen. And I think it happens to our men. I'm not a guy, so I wouldn't know, but I think it does happen to many of our young men too. They're told, you can't continue your education because you need to go out and get a job. Or as we're working, our work looks very different. So my work consisted of me going to a coffee shop in a very well-lit, conditioned atmosphere, and that's where I work. That's where I'm grading. That's where I'm prepping for class. That's where I'm working on my dissertation. But there are other individuals that are working in a very different type of job. Many of my family members were working very different types of jobs. And so to them, my work looked lazy, because I'm not breaking a sweat. I don't have calluses on my hands. I'm really not physically exhausted in terms of like physical exhaustion because I've been out in the heat. I'm physically exhausted because my brain has been sort of working so much, but that's a different type of exhaustion. And so I think that we end up sometimes not recognizing that our students may be receiving support oftentimes from their immediate family, but may not be receiving that support from their extended family. And for these individuals, oftentimes extended family means just as much as immediate family.
Yeah, and the messages that we see here is that exactly he felt privileged, being in a room where AC, and he's only imagining his parents working out there at 105 degrees, and so we want to make sure that we continue to support our students and tell them it is a right. Education is a right, it's not a privilege. So want to make sure that they have that and they internalize that even for Latinos, even for minorities, education is a right. And so that's one of the things that we want to continue to send that message across to them. That way they don't end up feeling like, I am here being lazy. No, you're not lazy when you're having to carry 18 units and a 3.5 GPA. So we want to make sure that we support our students that way. Yeah. So we have here we're speaking about the camp program, and so a lot of you might be familiar with the College Assistance Migrant Program and the work that they do. So once students do make it to the university, it is very important that we have programs such as camp and meet, that we continue to support them here. And so one of the things that these programs have, they also offer financial help. For instance, in the ME program, our students get paid to work. And even in camp, some of the students do get scholarships. And not only that, but the sense of belonging, we need that at the university level as well. So it doesn't end at the high school. We want to continue to have them feel welcome, have them like they have a family, have them feel that they have a support system here, and that, with that support system, they will continue to basically continue with their goals. And although that road will be challenging and a lot of full of barriers, we want to make sure that we continue to support these programs such as CAMP and MEEP and other programs that do support minorities.
And so then as they sort of begin to go into graduation, they also celebrate each other's achievements. They have built this sort of community with each other. And oftentimes at these universities, Sac State does this, where we sort of have individual celebrations for our students, right? So there's the Latino Chicano grad, there's Black grad, right? And so that's really a celebration for our Chicano Latino graduates. Now there is some work being done on that in terms of saying, should we be having these silos of graduation, or should we be incorporating those cultural aspects that are happening there into the larger graduation ceremony? And so there are some conversations that are starting to occur around having those. But many of our students really want to have this opportunity to celebrate each other, whether that be at large graduations or smaller graduations. But they really do take this opportunity to celebrate each other.
Yeah, and with each migrant student that does graduate, with each Latino, with each minority student that does graduate, we acknowledge the work that we all do as an educators, and we should also feel proud of that. Feel proud that they are actually able to make it and achieve their goal. And as Alonso shared during the story, the road to getting their degree is not always easy. I have both examples with my MIP advisors. I have a MIP advisor who's 23, got her master's degree, and is now a school counselor, at a high school. And I had a MIP advisor who took her 9 years to get her bachelor's. So, it's always, the challenges that we have as minorities are different, and a lot of the times It's, like I said, it's rough and a very bumpy road, but at the end we can make a difference as we continue to work with our minority students, and this is basically what we want them to visualize, their graduation, that day where they actually get their degree.
I'm just looking at the time.
Okay.
It's up to you. We can keep going. One thing about creating this sort of sense of community is that they end up missing each other. So when one of them, when they start, like they have such a small community, I think, so for some of my students with the degrees project, for example, they'll come to me and they'll be like, hey, Dr. G, so-and-so's not in class and hasn't been there for a couple of weeks. They start to recognize someone's missing from our group. And they'll start to do some reaching out to find out sort of where that person is, and start to do some calling, and may even start to visit that person. And so there is this sort of, many students do have to drop out, right? But there's this process called drop in, and that's something that we forget. So when a student drops out, oftentimes we count that as a dropout, and we sort of forget that number. But there's some work that's even being done right here by one of our colleagues, Dr. Nevadas, about the drop-in process. So once students drop out, when do they drop back in? Or how can we get them back in? How can we get them to drop back in? So I was a college dropout. I dropped out of college, and I needed someone. I always think like there was that someone person to make that phone call to get me to drop back in. And so that's something else that we have to keep recognizing, is there's a drop-in process as well.
Yeah, and it's an internal fight that we go through because not only, like I said, getting here, and myself, I got here at age 15, and I had to transition from a school from less than 100 students to a school that was more than 1,000 students. And so a lot of the messages that we get and a lot of the messages that we internalize are not always the best messages. And so we want to make sure that, here we see Alonso with friends, and they're at this, they're basically having a conversation about someone that it's not being to class, one of their friends. And so we want to make sure that we have the support programs where they build a family and they feel that they're working with each other and supporting each other, because that truly does makes a difference.
And one thing I will say, because I know there's some individuals that are pursuing their PhDs or their EPDs or thinking about it, there isn't a lot of work on the drop-in process. We have a lot of research on the drop-out process. So if you're interested in a dissertation or a thesis topic, I strongly encourage you to look at the drop-in process of those students that dropped out and they came back, and what was that process like for them. So that way we can reach out to many of our students that are dropping out. One other challenge that happens is for our young women, for our young underrepresented women. They're oftentimes, they're oftentimes protected, right? We protect our young women from the world outside. And so the research actually shows that Latinos tend not to go away for college. Latinos tend to go away for college. So our young men go away for college, and our young women often stay at the local state school or the community college. And that's oftentimes because the parents don't want their children, their daughters, to go away from college, especially our dads. Our dads really want our daughters to stay close to home. And we would have to ask dads about that. There's a lot of literature in that. Well, not a lot. There's some literature in that area as to really trying to understand what is that about. But it's probably got a lot of gender, socialization, identity in there. But here, Alonso and his older brother actually went to the parents and were able to advocate for their younger sister and tell them about the college experience and tell them why their younger sister should be going to college. And so oftentimes we need to rely on our counselors as those sort of voices to really advocate for our young women to go on, especially if they want to go on to their master's or even earn their PhD, because many of the state schools don't provide, don't have a PhD program We're one of a lucky state school that we have 2 doctorate degrees on our campus, but many state schools don't. And so by state school, I mean like Cal State systems. And so for our young women, those opportunities are oftentimes not there for them unless they go away, and to do that, they need to have the support of their families. And so again, graduation celebrations, I think. I think we can kind of end. Do you want to sort of end it? Because I do want to make sure we have time for questions and answers. So we have about 15 more minutes. I think Dr. Brunda really talked about how this is really intended to be a resource for parents and community members to be able to use and provide to their families that might be going through similar or the same experiences. And so it's in Spanish and English, and it's an online free resource for them.
Just a quick comment that I want to make. If you have time to read the story, you'll see that the life of Alonso, he's coming from a strong family, from a strong foundation. I also want to encourage you guys not to forget our students are coming from broken families or dysfunctional families. We have a lot of those now out there. And so they not only have the barriers that Alonso had, but that's an additional barrier. So as a faculty members, when you're working with your students, just remember that, a student might be coming to your class and might be, there with a smile, but there's a lot that they carry with them, especially when they're coming from broken families or dysfunctional families.
So if we look at the protective factors and the successes of as the demographics of our nation, and I remember myself when I was a child hearing about the browning of America, and it was always said with this real ominous tone. And I really thought they were talking about the pollution issue, the browning, and I was freaking out, and then I realized they were talking about us with this ominous tone. And so the sense when we look at what we call social reproduction, in which you have a group of people that are conditioned and through our own system structurally to end up in certain jobs and ensuring that they end up in jobs in which they're not moving up the economic ladder, the educational ladder, that there's something that's being replicated within our nation that maintains the racial stratification. So our hope is that we can address this in a gentle and loving way by the work that we do. So as you got a sense of the storyline, I just want to open it up for people here. The questions that you may have, you'll see on the flyer. You can just download it. We do have this publication already out with the needed students that are out there working in communities. It's also down in Nogales at the border at Comedor. It's a place in which people who are crossing the border, either one direction or the other, they have it available to read, as well as the Kino Project, another place in which people who are making their way across the border are able to have access to this document just to read and to learn something about the educational system. So if there's any questions or thoughts or reactions from people here, I think when we put this together, we never realized, we knew it was relevant, but even more relevant now. Just want to make sure that people can employ this. Just go ahead and download it, copy it as many times as you need to, send it on to other people. That's why we put this together. So any thoughts, any questions from those of you here?
I just want to say it was great to hear the aspect of bringing up about gang involvement. My experience at middle school, high school, continuation school in West Sacramento, that we had a picture inside our staff room of a large group of gang members, specifically Sureños, with a large safety net. And over it, we had our counselor write for every student that we don't meet their needs, this is what's going to happen.
And it's, you know, it's interesting because we know the theory behind all that, you know, it's called subculture theory, which is what produces gangs. And it, just as you stated, if people within the schools do not welcome, and rather than fearing, people who may be different from yourself, welcoming and seeing the assets that they bring, whether they're Muslim, whether they're African American, whether they're, you know, whatever part of the world they're from, Russian, that what added value they have. And they help them feel at home within our school communities. And because otherwise they will create their own, and that's what we've seen from the Gator culture.
We've also seen programs, I was just at the advising summit last week, and there was a program there that actually worked with incarcerated youth on getting them access to college. Because oftentimes these students, these children that go into gangs, something happens and they get put in jail, and then maybe they have a realization jail, or maybe they have, I had a faculty member when I was doing my dissertation that his work was actually educating at the jails. And so he would educate students at the jails, and then when they come out, they're like, hey, we want to go to college now. Like, we now have our GED, now we want to go on to college. Like, can you get us access to college? And then there became this barrier of like, oh, I don't know how to do that. But I saw here at Sac State that a program was actually born a couple of years ago that actually works with incarcerated youth on getting them into campus and working with them on giving them access to college, because many, just because you're in a gang today does not mean you have to be in a gang tomorrow. And so making sure that our students know that, and that even individuals in the gangs know that. There's some more Fight Victor videos in that area.
I have a question or thoughts.
Okay, so I'm more so interested in the educator's perspective in this, and I wonder, like, if the research and the story had any of the educator's perspective. When you say in the schooling community, when they want these minority students to feel welcome, I wanted to know, do the educators feel that there's more responsible, like faculty of color or educators of color? Do they feel that there's more responsibility on them to make these students feel more welcome? Like, you guys looked into that?
Yeah, I don't think that came up in the storyline as much because I think with the data we were looking at how to help parents understand the educational system so that there's not that differentiated acculturation with the children and then the moms and dads and so forth. But what I can say is that with looking at the training of teachers, administrators, educational leaders, that whole understanding of it's not those children, there are children, that we really haven't achieved that, I would say, in an operational way within our school system. Some places do it better than others, and it goes down from faculty member to faculty member. All it takes is that one good teacher with a good heart to reach out, and I know I had that. I was fortunate to have that. But in many cases, I hear over and over from the students, even in my grad program, that they didn't have teachers looking at them with high expectations. So then it takes several of us within, doctoral programs to kick it, telling them, you got to kick it up, honey, because what you didn't get before, I'm going to ask you to now make it up and work harder now. Yeah, but there is a lot to be said about that. Dr. Nevares?
I enjoyed the vignettes and case studies and there you played out. It was well presented. Now, the reality of things is it's becoming more challenging for the students from economic, from social, particularly from a political lens or perspective. Particularly for the junior students, and I was talking to Liliana Diaz, director of camp. She was telling me the applications of juniors is down 40%. And so the challenges will just continue to be scaled up. Now, looking at it from a leadership perspective, what is the role of a leader? That generally sets the tone for a climate that can be inclusive or inclusive. I think here's a good example of President Nelson making a concerted effort to imbue a climate of support that is supportive. That I know one of the examples that he did is provides So I like, a lot of time when we talk about this particular population, it's easy for us to point the finger and say, well, the students just try harder, they're more resilient, more dynamic, more resourceful, just fine. Oh, we can point to the families, don't care about the education. I like the balance that we provide in terms of saying that we gotta approach it from a comprehensive, holistic responsibility, value added perspective. And what is the role of institution? Yes, let's not get away from the role of the student and the family, but we need to be balanced in terms of what is it that the institution is doing or not doing to facilitate, so that success of particularly these things that is challenging.
And if I can close with the following, because I know we have a class coming in, that when we look at, and Christian, your point well taken, is that there tends to be a punitive response in terms of addressing some of the issues that we're seeing. So in terms of policy, how do we treat people? And we see suspension rates, expulsion rates higher for students of color, referral to special education and so forth. And so then how do we then provide the opposite, engagement, positive connection? So that's what we're hoping that through this document that you can have this discussion. So thank you everybody for coming.